I'm Natalie Alexander. Welcome to AI and Multilateralism, a playlist at the UN Library and Archives Geneva, where we're joined by experts who help us unpack the many ideas at the nexus of AI and international cooperation. Today, we're asking, can AI help us better predict, respond to, and recover from crises? We're joined by Dr. Martin Waehlisch, Associate Professor of Transformative Technologies, Innovation and Global Affairs at the University of Birmingham. He's also part of the research team of the Crisis Computing Project, a global community of scholars and practitioners who are driven to put computation to better use. He shares what exactly crisis computing is, the kinds of crises he hopes that AI can help us to address, and what is still missing from the global debate when it comes to how we use AI, individually and collectively. Dr. Martin Waehlisch, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you here. You are also a former colleague of the UN, so I'd love to hear about your experience in just a moment. But we're going to launch straight in and ask you about your current role. You're Associate Professor of Transformative Technologies, Innovation and Global Affairs at the University of Birmingham. I'm very curious, what's driving your research and your conversations with students at this intersection of technology and global affairs?
Yeah, what really drives my work is a curiosity about this intersection of how new technologies and especially transformative technologies can advance societies. And I'm especially passionate about how can we overcome crises, how can we prevent crises better, if that's even possible, or kind of prepare better, and also how can we heal from conflict and crisis. And there are a lot of new opportunities through new technologies, through transformative technologies that I'm exploring. And if you think about it, kind of historically, transformative technologies are basically technologies that are reshaping power and decisions in societies. A good example, or I think is a good example that I use in classroom are nuclear technologies. It's not just like having a new tech at hand, but like its leverage with regard to survival, energy independence, but it also has reshaped global security. And now AI is this very new transformative technology that we have at hand that we need to critically pay attention to.
We do see AI really transforming our world, but what do you mean when you say transformative technology?
Yeah, so textbook definition would be basically that transformative technologies are those who are technologies that are not just tools, but those who hold power and they reshape governance and how decisions are made, right? So they shape, empower, and impact societies. Take the printing press, for instance, that reshaped authorities over knowledge. I mentioned already nuclear technologies that transformed global security and diplomacy. And this is not just about merely improving efficiencies, but reconfiguring governance, accountability, and expertise. And for me, and what drives my research is this question of how technologies like AI can change how we can respond as societies, how we can grow societies, especially in the context of crises.
You've also worked at the UN before your role now for over a decade, working on peace processes in Lebanon, Iraq, Yemen, but also leading innovation work at the headquarters in New York. What did you see and experience there that kind of led your move back to academia?
Yeah, I mean, the UN has really changed over the last decade, but the UN has always changed, since its 80 years of existence, because the world is changing, right? The UN is a mirror to what we need as a global society, I hope, and at least that's kind of what we have been working on. So to say that when I started, and I feel old now, like a long time ago, the UN was of a different shape and form. You might have heard about the Quintet initiative of the current Secretary General, which puts attention on data, innovation, behavioral science, strategic foresight, and digital transformation as such. And this has really given kind of new fuel to experimentation in the United Nations. We've seen really a growth of innovation capacities and innovation initiatives in the United Nations. And obviously because of the emergence of transformative technologies like artificial intelligence, bureaucracies, big systems like the United Nations grab those as leverage to advance the many missions this organization has on crisis response, but also on health issues or global education.
Coming back then to one of the projects you're working on, we're going to explore one today, which is crisis computing. Tell us about the crisis computing project and what exactly is crisis computing?
Thanks for giving us some space. And when I say us, this is really a community of practitioners and scholars who have been looking at computational approaches to better, prepare, respond, and also kind of, again, heal from crisis and conflict. And there are different terminologies. Crisis computing is a term that a circle of us uses. There's peace informatics, there's deep blue tech. There are kind of different ways of how to address this matter. But for me, now I like to use the term computational global affairs. Number one, because I think the term international relations, which is very state-centered, is not really suitable anymore, given that we have seen very different actors now being, present and relevant, not just, diplomats in suits or dresses. But when I talk about computation, I'm talking about the scale of technologies and the scale of, what you can fit into an Excel spreadsheet. And I know nowadays, talking about artificial intelligence, like talking about soccer, everybody talks about it, but nobody really knows the rules. And, who isn't an AI expert nowadays? If you look at LinkedIn, you get a heart attack if you haven't done your 50th certificate in a row. But the truth is that there are new complex algorithms, there are new ways of machine learning where a complex puzzle of solving problems now has become more dense and has given us opportunities. Think about natural language processing as such, So basically, sifting through a large volume of unstructured language data, so it can be audio, text, video, etc., has become much easier. And then this is really has released a pain that has given us scale. So in the past, we had PhD students working on, speeches in the General Assembly, for 4 years, tagging data, training a model. Now you can solve this, in a fraction of a time. You can do this as a bachelor thesis, not as a PhD anymore, if you know how to use the tools at hand. So computation has really changed the game at the moment. And what we are passionate about is kind of how can we put this to better use? Because, and here it comes, there's of course the dark side. We've seen artificial intelligence being heavily employed in getting an advantage on the battleground, improving precisions of how the bullet can fracture your skull to kill you, or how to mobilize intelligence services to suppress an opposition. So we've seen the other side, and that's what we call double or triple use, because then there might be also civilian use or quadruple use for entertainment, or multiple uses. Tech has always multiple uses, and we have seen movement on many fronts. Peace is currently not on vogue. We've seen funding for peace building and heavy decline. It's already, I'm not saying dangerous, I'm joking here, but who talks about peace nowadays? So when we talk about a crisis, so moments of eruption, which is not just a status, right? That's like a disaster, like something that happened, but like a process. Kind of, I'm passionate about drawing attention to those matters because we've seen so much attention being spent on, I call it again, the dark side. And I think now is an opportunity to harvest technology for good. Let's also talk about that because that's also just often a catchphrase, especially in Geneva.
Something very recurrent in the episodes in this series is really the fact that there is incredible potential for these technologies to better serve the needs of people everywhere. Our reality today is that most AI development is not publicly accountable. So how do you see the crisis computing project helping to solve crises in a way where we can use the resources and AI to coordinate globally? How we can maybe not prevent, but better manage crises.
Yeah. So let me burst that bubble. And that's easy to say from an academic standpoint now, right? And I'm saying that self-critically because I've always tried to oscillate between, what some call the practitioner and the academic world. It's probably also artificial to create some boundaries here. But the truth is that data is power and information is might. Yeah, information is critical to take decisions, right? And the first thing that any party to any process, so it could be a conflict or just like trade negotiation, is you want to have an information advantage, right? So either you pay people or you build technologies to have that advantage because you want to multiply your diplomatic analytical workforce. Here it comes. So opening up a technology to everybody, again, transformative technologies, hold power, change governance, is difficult. So that's why this endeavor to make the printing press, nuclear technology, artificial intelligence available to everyone is a very noble endeavor, and depends on what your worldview is. Certainly it's mine. Like, I believe in equality, I believe in solidarity, I believe in community, but not all of us do in the world, apparently. Otherwise we would be there, where nuclear technology is shared, where everybody would have access to the internet. By the way, the UN is also working on that. But unfortunately, we see disparities, and these are engineered disparities. So solving this on an international level to put, again, artificial intelligence to better use of humanity is a tricky one. I'm not saying that one shouldn't engage, but I wanted to also at the beginning of this conversation put this out straight away, given that this podcast, runs under the UN Blue Label, and it could feel like a Roma session in a yoga spa in London somewhere. So I want to avoid that.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit more about the project and what kinds of crises you envisage that using AI and crisis computing could address.
Yeah, wonderful. So again, step back. Crisis is basically any moment of eruption. So this could be a natural disaster, obviously, but also armed conflict, but also financial crisis, right? Or a pandemic. So bigger term than just talking about disaster or conflict for that matter. Here are a few examples from my current work. Some of them, I worked at the United Nations on, and some are new as well. So number one field that I'm extremely passionate about is the democratic participation or public participation. Democracy, again, heavily charged term, but how do we hear voices of many to make decisions for all? Yeah, how do we hear the voice of many to make decisions for all? So here, technology comes really handy in because we can translate, talk in language that you want. The term is here deliberative technology that allows you to form an opinion on issues. We've seen a whole wave of new deliberative technologies. It's a gigantic market, not just for governments, but also for the private sector that wants to know whether people like Coke Zero more than Coke Light, want to look into the brains of people. And this can be repurposed to have public consultations on public issues. So that's a field that I'm very passionate about. And we are just at the beginning to really harvest the deliberative technologies for good, mostly because decision makers shy away from having truly open and public processes, not because of the technology, actually. Number one. Second one that I'm really passionate about is climate prediction, and especially extreme weather prediction. We often call those the weak signals. So things we don't really see at the horizon. It's winter, it's going to be cold in the UK. It's summer, it's going to be hopefully sunny in Switzerland, right? These are the kind of the strong signals we'll extrapolate from the past. But like extreme weather events, things we haven't really foreseen that have a real world impact. And climate is extremly complex. Yeah, I'm not talking about making choices for your next birthday. That can be complex depending on your age or your mental status. But, first world problems. But I'm talking about things that are complex. Think about the chaotic, so not deterministic. Think about this butterfly, example that Lawrence brought, in the 70s, like a little butterfly in Brazil can impact on the harvest in the United States. So things that are not straightforward. And here, complex modeling and simulations, again, using compute, like especially AI-powered compute, giving us new opportunities, basically. Whether we act on it, different question. Brings me to example number 3. How do we act on all the data that we collect and all the information that we gather and the technology we surround us with? And that's about behavioral science, right? How do we overcome the barriers to really harvest AI for good? And also, how do we make sure that we don't get too comfortable? So a project that I'm currently looking at is how can we create virtual simulations, virtual worlds of crisis simulations to engage police officers and crisis response officials in, and then measure over time what their response rate is, because there are certain assumptions where we haven't collected enough behavioral science data on. We don't know yet whether, typing our life into a chatbot every 60 seconds is making us more efficient. I think that's probably what lawyers and also many UN officials and others that work with text and bureaucracies currently experiencing, or whether they make us more lazy and hence bring us to the doomsday where game over, basically. And for that, we need to run more behavioral science experiment, especially with those who are in charge of crisis. And that's what I'm focusing on. So those three things: behavioral science with regard to virtual worlds, prediction with regard to extreme weather events, and deliberative technologies, three examples of my current work that keep me excited and busy.
Do you see some of these examples you mentioned already being used today? Are there any precedents that show us that this is possible?
Yeah. So, believe it or not, but I have colleagues in the university, in the academic circles, that say they will never touch artificial intelligence. And then I ask them about who booked their flight, and most likely didn't have personal assistants, so they used a recommender system. So it's very hard to show where is it not entrenching. But to be concrete, indeed, we have seen a ramp up of initiatives when it comes to equipping crisis responders. And that starts, number one, with creating better workflows to have digital twins of cities, right, to respond. So we'll have this in the UK across the board to get a sense for where, believe it or not, it's an island, where the next floods affecting the coastal areas. So we have seen various projects in the United Kingdom on that matter. And that's crisis response, flood prediction, right, so that you take the measures needed to protect your society. And that's crisis computing to a large extent as well, because it's not just about a tiny Excel spreadsheet, but like really getting live data from multiple sources to make sense of an unfolding reality. And kind of digital twin projects, I think a very concrete example where across the United Kingdom, across Europe, across the world, like there have been various efforts to leverage new technologies. So that's one example. Second example, as I'm passionate about virtual worlds, I've seen really also mushrooming of VR experiences preparing decision makers. Again, that's an huge entertainment market and also a very lucrative market for the military, thinking about creating extreme situations to prepare soldiers, because thankfully, human life is still, it can't be valued. So we see militaries investing into those simulations to make sure that, the loss of a soldier is minimized. And I think also when it comes to, I mentioned already, deliberative technologies, many open source applications, the European Union mapped out deliberative tech last year. They counted over 100 together with Felix Kufus. Shout out to Felix. We published an article last year on digital dialogues, looking at kind of, what are the downsides and what are the advantages of those tech solutions. So plenty in use already.
Yeah. I want to now tie this then to what this means for multilateralism. So we see examples of crisis computing being used by the government, the private sector, and we see how it can be incredibly useful for bringing together very complex situations and being able to then more easily see how we can respond or manage. What do you think it's needed at the multilateral level for crisis computing to be truly effective?
It's a difficult one, and thanks for keeping the difficult questions, for the end. Well, number one, I think multilateral coordination has been difficult. Disregard the topic. If you want to make a decision with more than one person, and there are many voices in us as well, good luck. So kind of just and then coordination is usually a slogan that we use to make sure that there are no results, right? Because that entails like process that is often lengthy and complicated. I'm joking around here, but obviously, we need coordination. We need some kind of conversation, and thankfully, at least on artificial intelligence, in comparison to other topics, there has been quite some exceptional effort in the United Nations, but also other fora to have a conversation. I think kind of this was quite exceptional that the topic has reached the Security Council early on, actually. It's quite exceptional that we have a board, reports, a process in place. On many other topics, we don't. Think about space, unregulated, unsolved, like for years. Or nuclear arms, for instance, as well, just like for that matter, like barely a conversation on those matters. So having a process in place in the United Nations and in other fora as a fact is a very important one, number one. Second one, I think what we need more of is further engagement, between different actors. So that's private sector, and why should they, if they aren't regulated in the big states, why should they? Obviously, they do engage with a minimum, but they have other ways of just progressing. I think we're missing still a deep culture and societal debate about technologies. Everybody invites the tech makers and shapers, but I haven't seen enough philosophers having a conversation about or helping us think through, questions of morale and responsibility, but not responsible from a legal point of view, but from a deep individual and collective point of view. I've seen no artists really responding, like on a global scale. So I'm talking about, think about the song Radio Killed the Radio Store. I'm not going to sing that now. You don't want to hear me sing that. But for your audience out there, just type it on YouTube, depending on your age, Video Killed the Radio Store. So like a deep cultural response to, like a shift in society. So I think like, obviously there are forums and venues, but like not on a global scale. Because also, honestly, at the moment, we're so busy with just following what's happening in Minnesota and in the United States as such. So like having a wider conversation is an important one. But it's tricky. It's always easy to say, right? Kind of this often needs to emerge naturally. Think about nuclear technology again. You need a major disaster or an incident where you have this global conversation on a certain issue, but this would certainly help global coordination. On the other side, maybe because this is dealt with in technical circuits more, maybe that's why this is all progressing, actually. Maybe that's why I'm progressing to a sense that we at least have venues in place where people meet. Imagine if this was heavily globally polarized we have movies and obviously also songs and podcasts about it, but maybe that would actually make things more difficult. So I don't know. Again, you're asking those very difficult questions, and I can just share my humble thoughts. Hope that's helpful.
It's very interesting. And I did want to ask you, because we see a lot of questions these days about how multilateralism can be better organized through having the private sector there, academia, civil society. Do you see effective crisis computing maybe happening at a more local or regional level?
Yeah, goes back to, do we see better crisis response happening on a local or regional level? We're currently recording this in January, kind of snow, bad weather, etc. Of course, you take care of what's happening right at your doorstep because you want to leave the house, But it's equally difficult because, who are your neighbors? Are you getting along with them? Like, probably then a UN process is easier than figuring out something that's happening in East Birmingham. So, on multiple levels. It also depends on where the resources are. So the truth is that the resources, depending on where you live, are not evenly distributed, right? So I've seen some interesting AI initiatives in Southeast Asia, and they're very local because kind of the community has money and spends money on those matters, And on the other side, we've seen quite interesting regional initiatives because a group of states comes together. Let me point out I think a great initiative that the UN is leading, which is the Complex Risk Analytics on Craft. That is an initiative that started some years ago to really foster an ecosystem approach to focus on data collaboration. And we've seen this start, years ago with HDX, the Humanitarian Data Exchange, and really now some states coming together. Of course, multilateral affairs is a difficult business at the moment, but still, like many still believe in the us, in the collectiveness. And I think those initiatives are important because resources matter and kind of collective efforts can, and not just academically, but strategically can reduce transaction costs. So collective action is usually cheaper than just unilateral action. Collective action is, again, that goes out to those who have a very capitalistic golden mindset. Collective action is cheaper for all. Just for you individually, probably not. But multilateralism makes also economically sense.
The General Assembly endorsed two mechanisms in 2025, the Global Dialogue on AI Governance and the International Scientific Panel on AI. From your perspective, how should crisis governance and crisis computing be addressed in these forums?
In a very open manner as it is at the moment, right? And that goes back to kind of what I said earlier. It's good that we have those processes being put in place, both thinking about kind of scientific advice. So scientific means like a very structured and systematic way of approaching, dissecting, unpacking, labeling, classifying an issue, like your butterfly collection or your stone collection, and then producing knowledge and also distilling from knowledge solutions that can feed into a policy planning process. So that's very good. So I hope that, and I think surprisingly, we have seen this progress on those matters. So I hope that those processes are kept alive, they're kept open. and their kind of jump boards, into a better society. Those are kind of aspirations. Because what's the alternative? A closed door conversation. We've seen this on other issues. Again, nuclear technology, and what have you. We need to make sure, and here it comes, I think that those events are not just alibis, right? So that we kind of states and companies say, we've done this, but like actually, the real work is happening elsewhere, obviously. We're not living here in La La Land. So like hopefully those venues are taken seriously. They're kept open, they're kept alive, and they progress as well. They're transparent, which I've seen, being the case. You can follow, what's happening there. I think then we're on the right track. But I'm worried. I'm worried that kind of the mechanisms that exist, are just alibis. That it's like, traffic rules in New York City. They are just a good suggestion. Who really follows the red light on 14th Street? So that I have concerns. I'm very worried about what's happening to us. Yeah. And what we are doing to us. It's not just happening, but what we're doing on those matters at the moment.
What do you hope comes next then for the Crisis Computing Project? What's on the horizon?
Yeah, so shout out to Sumi and Mohammed. So Sumi is a dear colleague in Japan, and Mohammed is lead scientist at the Qatar Computing Research Institute in Doha. So just to say that, what started as a collective exercise last year with a workshop at the AI for Good Summit in Geneva. We had a follow-up meeting in Japan on those matters. Super interesting conversations about, nuclear deterrence, as you can imagine, but also humanitarian disasters. So we're trying to make sense of all of that. So for us, we're trying to make sense of, we're thinking about what are the next frontiers? What are the next knowledge frontiers we need to tackle? I already mentioned behavioral science, something that I'm very passionate about. We're thinking about kind of what's the next tech leap that we are facing. I'm not talking about quantum, it's like becoming an AI expert. Here, my prediction, I think in 24 months, everybody is going to change their LinkedIn profile to quantum expert. But there's much more, think about, biotechnology and how that's integrating your body to make decisions under pressure and so forth, scary, but also interesting new frontiers. So for us, kind of making sense of all of that is currently a priority. And then within the circle that we are part of, we're keeping the conversation alive and building prototypes. And we need more funding for that. We need more attention to those matters. That's kind of on my priority list. I've been working on a simulation which is called the Crisis Room, which uses, it's like a game where you battle a president. You have to talk him out of war. I've been fine-tuning this experience, advancing that. So more prototypes are important to not just talk about, but really test and do those new wonderful things. Yeah, that's what keeps me very excited.
Really interesting. Looking forward to seeing some of these prototypes and the rest of the project. We ask every guest to share one open access resource if listeners would like to learn more.
Yeah, I would love to make some advertisement for the Peace and Security Data Hub. That is a joint initiative of many parts in the UN Secretariat. So if you go to psdata.un.org and shout out to the Information Management Unit that has been leading this. I've been working on this from day one with colleagues. It's an amazing data resource if you're passionate about peace and security issues, and it brings together data sources directly from the United Nations. So I'm not talking about academic data sets, but like data sources that are pulled together from the United Nations. So if you haven't checked out the Peace and Security Data Hub, please do so, psdata.un.org.
Thank you so much, Martin. We'll make sure it's in the show notes. We wish you all the best as you continue with the Crisis Computing Project and all of your work on transformative technologies. But take care for now.
Thank you.